Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so we'll get started. I'd like to call the April 17th Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee meeting to order. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge we are conducting this meeting on the unceded traditional territories of the Hupa-Chesed First Nations. We also have directors calling in from other territories and would like to acknowledge those First Nations and express our gratitude and our respect. Notice to attendees and delegates that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube on the Regional District website. First thing we'll do is we'll do introductions. We'll go around the boardroom and then I'll call out directors to introduce themselves that are attending online. My name is Debbie Haggart. I'm the city appointed representative from the city of Port Alberni, vice chair of the Regional District Board, and chair of the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee meeting. So we'll go this way, Heather.
Good morning, everyone. Heather Zenner, Manager of Administrative Services.
Mike Sparrow, Regional Rep for Cherry Creek.
Cynthia.
Good morning, Cynthia Dick, General Manager of Administrative Services.
Daniel.
Daniel Sayan, the CAO for the ACRD.
Thank you. Dr. Roth.
Good morning, Susan Roth, Beaver Creek.
Director Beckett.
Morning, everyone. Bob Beckett, Area A, Bamfield.
Director Boyko.
Good morning, Frank Boyko, Electoral Area Director for Beaufort.
Director Coots.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mariah Coots for Chocolate First Nation.
Director Jack.
Good morning, John Jack, Chair of the Regional District and Director for Hawaii First Nations.
And we have a couple of staff members that are online. Paula, do you want to introduce yourself now?
Thank you, Chair. Paula Weichelberger, Solid Waste Manager for the ACRD.
And Andy Kunderman, do you want to introduce yourself as well, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Eddie Kunderman, Operations Manager with the ACRD.
Director Cote. Are you there, Penny, to introduce yourself?
I am. Good morning. Penny Cody, Salt Lake Electoral Area Director. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We have an agenda in front of us. Is there any additions from directors? Is there any additions from a corporate officer?
None from me, thank you.
Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Moved by Director Sparrow, second by Director Roth. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Is there any declarations or conflict of interest? Seeing none, we'll go on to the minutes. We have minutes from the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee meeting held February 29th, 2024. Is there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, could I get a motion that the minutes of the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee meeting? Dr. Roth. Okay, moved by Director Ross. Got to get a seconder. Second by Director Sparrow. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. I see Director Minions on the line now. Do you want to introduce yourself, Director Minions?
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. I'm having a hard time connecting today, but Director Minions, Mayor for the City of Port Alberni.
Thank you for being here today. Okay, next we have petitions, delegations, and presentations. We have Victor Copetti, Transit Planner from BC Transit, regarding Transit Future Service Plan update. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and do your presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. Absolutely. My name is Victor Copetti. I'm a transit planner with BC Transit. And if I just share my screen here. There. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so my name is Victor Copetti. I'm a transit planner with BC Transit, and I'm here to provide an update on the Transit Future Service Plan that we have been designing for Port Alberni. I believe I've spoken to this committee a couple times before, and so there's some information here that you might be familiar with, but just to be thorough, I'm going to do a quick overview of the plan before we get into what's been happening. So the Transit Future Service Plan is designed to essentially create a 5 to 10-year outlook for Port Alberni Transit. In the plan, we will be outlining expansion priorities and the resources needed in order to conduct those expansions. Everything that we do in the plan is to be in line with municipal, regional, and provincial planning documents. And the recommendations that we're going to be putting forth are all based on data collection and review, as well as engagement results, which we're going to talk a little bit about as we go through the presentation here. So we've moved quite a ways with the project, and we're currently in stage 3 of 4, which is the engagement stage, which means most of the items in stages 1 and 2 are complete. We've talked about these in the past, but things like data collection, policy review, our first draft of service improvements, those have already been put together for the plan. So we are currently in stage 3, which is primarily engagement. We've already reached out to our operators, and we've talked to them and had a survey for them and gotten a lot of their feedback. And I say on this slide that the public surveys are complete, but we are actually extending the public survey an extra week just to make sure that we reach as many people as possible, although so far engagement has been very strong. We have over 330 responses to the public survey, which is fantastic. The other thing that we also just completed last week, the government relations manager that I worked with, Seth Wright, and I were both up in Port Alberni last week at the exchange and various bus stops, talking to riders, telling them about the survey and getting some feedback in public to kind of have more of that personal engagement as opposed to just the online survey. So a lot of the items from stages 1 and 2 are done, and we are looking good in stage 3 with a lot of our engagement stuff. Of course, there's more engagement that we want to do. One of the biggest things is when we initially started this project, we created a stakeholder list where we outlined the main stakeholders in Port Alberni that would be involved or affected by this plan heavily somehow. And so we've reached out to a lot of those stakeholders and told them about the survey, but we also want to do a stakeholder workshop. So the stakeholders can join, we'll tell them more about the plan, and we'll give them the opportunity to provide feedback more directly rather than going through the survey route. We are also working with the First Nations communities to see how they would like to engage and the level that they'd like to be involved with the plan, as they are, a very important group to include and consult with. And we're working on consulting with them separate from the stakeholder workshop, but definitely part of stage 3, the engagement part of this plan. From here, now that we've completed most of the survey work and the public survey will be done next week, we have to analyze a lot of these online and in-person engagement results from both drivers and the public. We want to compare them to the initial draft service improvements that we created to see if we were on the right track. A lot of those service improvements were created just based on staff knowledge and the data that we collected and analyzed. But we want to see if the drivers and the general public share, have the same idea of what we'd like to see in the system, or if there are other things that they might want to see, or maybe some of our improvements are not at all what they were expecting. So we will kind of want to cross-reference the data and analytics with the actual personal engagement. You will probably see me again in the next month or two as well, because I want to take a lot of these findings, and once they're consolidated and we have a bit more, when we have our more concrete expansion plans, I want to bring this to the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Committee. So you will probably see me in the next month or two, like I said, maybe with a little bit more of a, like, we're going to do an overview of all those plans, but I want to have a little bit of a dialogue to get feedback from yourselves, to see, again, if we are on the right track with the things that we've put together before we go and we actually write the plan. And so that's the final step, which is the stage four, which is the report. So once all that feedback is collected, our goal is to have that done before the end of June. We will be developing a draft of the plan over the summer, July, August, and then we're anticipating that it'll be finalized and adopted in early fall. That's everything from me in terms of an update on the project, but I'm happy to take any questions. Some of them might be a little bit difficult to answer if they're a bit more specific, because we're still kind of sifting through a lot of that engagement work right now. But like I said, I'm confident that in the next month or two, you'll be seeing me again with a lot of really interesting information, both from the data side and the engagement side, as well as what we actually are looking to potentially do with the Port Alberni transit system. So thank you very much. And again, any questions are welcome.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Can I just ask you to stop sharing your screen just so I can see the
Absolutely.
line a little bit better? Is there any questions from the committee? Director Boyko.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was just mainly an update that we're extending the survey and didn't really have a lot of details, but is this like the transit extension out to Sproul Lake and Beaver Creek that we're talking about, or is there more details than just those two items?
There are a few more details, although those are two items that are part of the survey and part of our potential expansion items as part of the plan. So Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek, we did ask about potential service to Nanaimo, although that is very early stages, but we did have that question on the survey to kind of gauge interest from the general public. And then we just had some more minor changes. We were looking to potentially do a slight realignment for the Route 3, potentially servicing some areas that it doesn't service as of yet. And then just more general questions about transit, like, how often do you take transit? Do the transit times work for you? Does the transit frequency work for you? Would you want to see transit earlier or later in the day? So general questions about transit to see if there are areas that we can improve, but also questions about expansion to kind of gauge interest in terms of if transit was a new transit route did appear, what's the level of interest there?
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification. Second question I have is, how does this potential increase in transit relate to the recent Bill 44 out of British Columbia for transit-oriented areas where we have to have minimum building sizes, such as 6-story apartments near 400 meters within a transit stop? How will that apply to, say, potential things out Sprout Lake and Beaver Creek? Because our infrastructure is not set up to handle anything regarding water and sewer systems for those kind of buildings. Thank you.
That's a good question. My initial comment on that would be, when those bills came out, BC Transit did a review of all our transit systems to see just how much it would affect the built form around our routes, and we discovered that the level of frequency on most of those routes meant that the level of change would be minimal, if not non-existent. Like the level of frequency that the province was looking for the heavily increased density, very few routes across British Columbia actually meet those standards. And so even having the service out to Sprout Lake and Beaver Creek, the expected increased density, it wouldn't really affect those areas.
So I understand what you're saying, but one of the concerns is that rule is being applied to places on the islands that are smaller, such as Nanaimo and Latsville and places like that. So there is a genuine concern that because we say the density and user ridership might not qualify, it is a real concern of people that this may be applied to these areas that do not have infrastructure in place for it. So having the transit applied to rural areas brings a lot of concerns to people, and that is one of them. Thank you.
Okay, that is good to know, and I can note that and put together a little bit more of a official or concrete response if that question comes up as we're going through engagement.
Thank you, Director Cote, and then Director Roth. Go ahead, Director Cote.
Thank you. I see that you have, is the sound okay? Because I have something else going at the same time. Okay,
Yeah,
great. So looking at the service to Sprout Lake would just be going to the Sprout Lake Provincial Park?
That was the service that we had designed previously. So we're asking about Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek, and Nanaimo on the survey. But Sprout Lake, we actually did complete a feasibility study back in 2020. So we've already done research and analysis and created 2 possible route options for that service.
Okay, they sort of both look sort of the same. I guess it's where they end up in the city of Port Alberni.
Yes, yeah, it's where they terminate. So one of them is at one of them connects to the Walmart and one of them connects to the Redford Exchange. Those were the 2 options. But in terms of the service at Sprout Lake, yes, it's very similar. They both kind of do the same turnaround at the park.
Okay, this goes through the Tichat and past the Clicquot Reserve. Would there be stops, and has there been communications with those First Nations? Because this would very much service their areas.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, we've, especially with the Tichat First Nations, we've been in contact with them, and yes, it would service their First Nations areas, and we would have stops along the way.
In the past, the previous study, that was one of the challenges, was because the bus would need to stop at the Tichat market.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people would be able to take the bus from there then.
Yeah.
So is this part of the negotiations then for this to move forward?
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of part of the engagement that we plan to do with them, to make sure that if we do introduce this service, we want to make sure that there are stops on that line. So like you mentioned, at the market would be a great place to include a stop to potentially service the community in that area. So, we want to work with them and make sure that they're heard and that they have the opportunity to provide input in terms of where they'd like to see that service. But yes, it is part of the conversation.
Sorry, can I keep going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if there would be actual bus stops for people to take shelter, like bus shelters, I guess, along the route. I'm not sure if that's down the road or if there would be provision for bicycles. And the previous study did a route all the way to Sprout Lake Landing, the end of Lakeshore, along the highway in Lakeshore, around Faber, Sterling, and to town. So that's not part of this study at this point?
Not at this point, no. Because we had completed the feasibility study, the 2 routes that we've created are kind of the initial service. That's not to say that we wouldn't be able to potentially investigate an expansion to that service in the future. But for this plan currently, like we're looking within the next 5 years with the TFSP, that's kind of the level of service we would initially put in. And then in terms of shelters and bus stop amenities, that one's a little bit harder for me to answer because that's not necessarily BC Transit's responsibility. It's usually the local government partner. But we, depending on the level of service at some of those bus stops, which we can also once the service is running, we can definitely take a look at and determine if there are certain bus stops that have more ridership than others. Then we could potentially look into recommending shelters, or we also have the shelter program that might be able to help put a shelter at that location.
So remembering that the previous study was for a potentially a paratransit service that would help out people with some disabilities. Are we not using that study at all then for this?
That's a good question. I actually see my colleague Seth Wright has his hand up, so he might be able to answer some more of these questions. So maybe I'll turn it over to Seth.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to call on you, Seth, because I saw your hand raised. So go ahead, jump right in.
Thank you. And of course, through the chair, happy to just comment on a couple of these pieces. I'm gonna go back to one of Director Cote's first questions first and answer in the sequence that they were asked, if that's okay. The first question was about partnership with First Nations, and so we've initiated conversations and initiated outreach to the First Nations along the Sprout Lake route, and we haven't had the opportunity to sit down and have an in-person meeting yet, but we're looking forward to the opportunity to advance the conversation, and there's certainly a process, and we'd look at cost sharing agreements between the regional district and the respective nation for establishing new service to First Nations to help fund any extension of service. So that's a process that we are very familiar with and happy to support the ACRD on carrying out. The question about shelters. Shelters outside of municipal boundaries are subject to permits required by MODI, but ultimately we work with the regional district in these cases, and we have a very generous shelter program that enables 80% of the capital costs to be funded through a massive grant from the federal and province. That's BC Transit's shelter program, and so we're happy to roll that out to look at providing shelters at key locations along a new route, as we are doing with West Coast with your staff. There's also another program that enables, if there's more road maintenance required, the Minor Betterments Program under the Ministry of Transportation provides some funding for more significant loads and things like that where that's possible. So we do have some resources to provide to support the possibility of shelters at key locations. And then finally, the previous paratransit study, I would say that paratransit study informed the work we're doing right now, and we picked up where that work left off.
Thank you. Did you have any other questions, Director Cote?
Not really at this time, I guess. I'll keep thinking about the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Roth and Director Boyko. Go ahead, Director Roth.
Hi. There's an extremely low level of interest from the people of Beaver Creek to extend this down Beaver Creek. But do you have a map or speak to the proposed improvements for Beaver Creek?
Unfortunately, we do not have a map, no. So the Sprout Lake service, as I mentioned, the feasibility study was completed. So we're a lot further along in terms of what that service would look like. The Beaver Creek and the Nanaimo connectivity, that's something that we would actually mention in the plan that a feasibility study would need to be conducted. And so we don't really have an exact idea of what that route would look like as of yet, and that work would come after this plan is created. And whether or not it's even something we want to investigate further will kind of come from the feedback that we get from the general public. And so if there's no interest in Beaver Creek expansion, then we would not include it in the plan. But if there is some interest, then the next step would be a feasibility study where we dive into that specific service a little bit more, look at data and engagement on that specific that connectivity, and then determine what that route would look like.
There were some questions about the survey and people were talking about it online, and there wasn't really a question to say, or, where someone could provide an answer that they weren't interested. It didn't allow for that, the survey. And most of the discussion, there was a lot of discussion. There was only one person out of, I don't know how many, but a lot of people that said that they were interested. So I think there's a very low level of interest. And, you know, if it came to the table and I was to vote on it right now, I would say to leave Beaver Creek out. But
Yeah, it's hard for me to speak to it exactly right now because I haven't looked at the engagement is still ongoing and we haven't done the engagement analysis as of yet. What I will say is that there was some interest in Beaver Creek looking at comments and the results of the survey, but the interest was lower for Beaver Creek than it was for Sprout Lake. And so that's something we would definitely take into consideration. And again, it's hard for me to speak to it right now because I want to make sure I have all the facts before I can definitively say yes or no. But it was a trend that we're starting to notice with the incoming results.
thank you.
Thank you, Director Boyko, then Director Cote. Go ahead, Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you. I just want to echo a couple things that Director Roth just said. It'd be good to see some kind of potential map. I mean, there's only one main road out Beaver Creek anyways, but there's a couple little feeder sections. Second thing is, this survey, I did it. There is no option to say, I don't want service in Beaver Creek or Sprout Lake or whatever. It's just an option that says, I use it or I don't use it. It'd be good to see that. It's the same thing we did on the aquatic survey. There was nothing to say, I don't want it. And that detracts from any potential people filling it out that says, why am I filling this out when I can't say no? So with regard to the Sprout Lake thing, so there was a large petition 4 years ago that was against the Sprout Lake transit system. And I'm just going to read off a couple of points because over 300 people filled out this petition, but I just want to see if any of these items are being addressed. A lot of it related to people are concerned about crime from Port Alberni going out to the rural locations. The crime rate in the city is double the provincial average, whereas in the rural area, it's half the provincial average. So people were concerned about increasing crime coming from the city to the rural areas, drugs and needles in trails and parks, increased theft, these kind of things. So I just wonder what we're looking at to address that. Thank you.
That's a question I may not necessarily have an answer for yet, although I will say that, again, from my initial review of some of the engagement that's coming through, those are comments that we are aware of and have come through. And so, you know, now that it's kind of on now that it's some of the engagement that we have available to us, we might take we have to take that into consideration. We'll be taking a look at some of the expansion priorities with that in mind. So.
Thank you, Director Cote, then Director Jack. Go ahead, Director Cote.
Thank you. What happened a few years back was very disheartening. There was a campaign that the city was full of drugs and thieves, and it reminds me of something south of the border kind of conversation. I don't believe that would happen. I would really like to see this survey go to the high school, go to the kids that in the communities to see if they would take the bus service. I used to live in Beaver Creek, right along Lugren Road, and I definitely would have taken a bus service if it was available at that time, because one family car, the cost of living these days is atrocious. You can't be running your kids to baseball and to swimming lessons and to see a friend, see family, take them to a job, to their first job. Seniors who are disabled. My father doesn't drive anymore. He lives in Parksville though. He has a scooter. It's a very long ride for a scooter from Sprout Lake or Beaver Creek to get into town to see doctor's appointments, family, you name it. This is a needed a needed service for communities, all communities. I'm looking at the transit on the West Coast and thinking how those people's lives are going to change for the better because of transit being available to them. It's just, it's amazing. It makes my heart warm to think that they've got a transit system now, and that the stories that are going to come out of there are going to give this board the information that you need. And also climate change. We need to get as many cars off the road as we possibly can. And a transit service, I believe, would really benefit our communities. I think that going to the park, allowing youth and seniors and whoever to be able to get out there. I know people that would use it from the city to go out and have a picnic, have a cool day out at the lake, because they can get into the water instead of being in an apartment where we're going to be facing record highs again this year, I'm sure. And with the no snowpack and water crisis that we're going to be facing, I think it's really important. Thanks. That's all I had.
Thank you, Director Jack.
Are we skipping Seth? He has his hand up.
I think he just forgot to put it down from the last time. Is that correct?
Oh,
or did you have something
there
to
you
say?
go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I kind of have a problem with the way that we conduct engagement on transit specifically, because I'm not of the mind that it's necessarily something that we have to look at from a business case perspective. And mostly I think that because when people think of transit, it has to be considered an alternative to the dominant form of transport, which is using a car or other vehicle. And I think what isn't considered at this point isn't the fact that transit is somehow more expensive for everyone. Part of the deal at that point, though, is that the service that it provides helps you reduce your reliance on a vehicle, especially if you have a gas guzzler, right? And so part of that is also that. Now, part of the reason that people choose to use an alternative to a internal combustion engine, a vehicle, is mostly having to do with cost nowadays. Part of it, and part of the decision-making process, is that the service needs to be there, it needs to be reliable, and it needs to be something that actually does move the needle on costs, right? And usually the trade-off is privacy and time, right? So it takes a bit longer, but it's $4 instead of $9. And so those are the kind of things that we need to consider when we're looking at transit. It's not necessarily whether somebody who hasn't thought about it decides they don't like it for some reason, but rather look at the numbers. And when we look at things when inflation is happening, taxation isn't really the issue at that point. The issue are rents or mortgages or transportation costs. And those are the big things that affect households, other than debt, but that's a different category. So if we're actually thinking about what will help households rather than whatever the bottom line is, then we're probably have to look at something like improved transit for everyone. And so that's part of it. That's the original part, right? And people will choose what they want to choose, but I think in order for something to have value, people need to feel like they can make the decision as an alternative, which means you can't like tiptoe into transit. You actually have to invest in it for people to have confidence in it enough to drop a car, right? And dropping a car saves you anywhere between $750 to probably $1,500 a month, depending on what you're driving and how often you drive. So I know that it won't affect everyone, but at the same time, it may affect way more people once you invest in it and people start actually using it. And I think that's part of the consideration here and may explain why the survey was the way it was. I do have a problem with the campaign that had happened last time. It was wrapped up with a bunch of other things as well, not just being opposed to something, mostly just being opposed to everything because they didn't have an outlet to have any anger against anybody else. And that was purely unfair. But what I do have a problem with, and I don't want to take words out of Shari's mouth or anybody, is that when we look at crime statistics, we have to remember that about 3 years ago or more, the RCMP came to our board and told us, we are changing our statistics. We are going to include every time somebody just calls and has a point of contact, and therefore it can skew the numbers significantly. So I would say that the concerns, people can be concerned, but whether or not it's an actual problem is a different consideration completely. And so I think that's something that's risk management, whereas safety is a feeling. Risk management is something we can do. And it's not just based on the surface level of what's reported by the RCMP, because they have to report everything now, which really makes the numbers muddy. And that's even when it's calls that end up not being anything. So I think that look into transit to actually know what's possible so that people can derive from that what they might be able to save based on the information that would be done in such a study would be beneficial for everyone in the region, especially given what's happening with the West Coast. I think that that's more than valuable. I think it's an honest solution to all the problems we're seeing with inflation, with the cost of living going up, and with climate change. It's not EVs. EVs aren't the answer. It's public transit. We just need to actually buy into it at a regional level, because then that enables actual economics to work for households, but also for the region. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go into too much detail, and I feel like I could. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Jack. I think we have to realize that as both the city and the regional district increases their different densification, we have to also increase the transit services at the same time. It just seems to be a logical next step. We have to start planning for growth, and this region is growing. Vancouver Island is increasing in population, so we have to be prepared for that. And as Director Jack and Director Cote both stated, the days of 2 cars in the garage are long gone. Transportation has become economically unviable for many people and many families. So in order for families to have jobs and get to work, increased transit services is hugely needed. Director Boyko and then Director Roth.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that transit does help, but making a statement such as increasing taxes does not get passed on to people, I don't know if that's correct. We just passed a budget that had a double-digit tax increase that affects everyone in the valley and surrounding areas. So 10.5% plus or minus a little bit. I think it's naive to say that that tax increase will not get passed down to every person in every item in this valley. Rents are going to go up. Costs for goods are going to go up. Everything gets passed on. So every time you have a tax increase, it gets passed on to everybody evenly. So we need to take that into account as well. I just looked at crime statistics over time, and I went back, a decade here. Statistically, Port Alberni has been higher than the provincial and federal averages by 100 to 200% for at least the last decade. So changing numbers 4 years ago, I don't think it really makes a huge difference, but it is a concern that people in the regional areas are passed on their concerns to the directors that the crime average in the city, we are seeing it, people come from the city out to there on bicycles and other things right now, and the concern is potentially valid, not valid, however you want to say it, that will increase. Thank you.
Director Roth.
I'd just like to say that I've rode the transit in Vancouver and on the Lower Mainland for many, many, many years, every day. And if it's not convenient, people won't use it. And I can't imagine a bus coming down Beaver Creek Road or going back and forth several times a day. It just wouldn't be reasonable. The environmental and financial costs would be really high when you compare what the usage would be. There's so few people out there. It's not that dense. and we're very limited on growth. It just doesn't make sense, especially when you talk about climate change and environmental impacts. Thank you.
Dr. Jack.
Thanks. So yeah, just to clarify, Dr. Boyko, I did say that the taxes would go for everyone involved when they but my point wasn't that the taxes were going to increase, but rather the savings in the usage of a transit system would far outweigh, for households, would far outweigh any taxes that would be paid out. And that the more you benefit, or the more you use transit, the more you benefit. Right. And so we don't necessarily need to drop a car, but if people start using their vehicles 25% less, then that actually has a net benefit, usually, depending on the numbers and the costs involved in running the transit, a net benefit across all of the aggregate households, right? And that's what we should be tracking, not necessarily individual households, because it might work for some, might not work for others. But the overall utility can be calculated by looking at the overall savings compared to only relying on vehicles. And so that's the argument I make for transit, is that if you have transit that's frequent and reliable enough, people will start using it the same way that if you have bike lanes, people will feel safe enough to actually use them, right? And that sort of thing, not just a line of paint on a road. So that's at least the value. So I don't want to say that it won't cost taxes. I know that taxes do have an impact on people, but I think they should be expressed not just in percentage increases, but by real numbers per $100,000 per year. Just to put it in context, right? So like express them both. From an environmental impact, having one person in one giant vehicle making their trips back and forth has a larger impact than probably 6 or 7, maybe even fewer people in one bus. So the environmental impact argument is actually the opposite, I think, Director Roth, is that more people using transit, you put one person in one vehicle, it's going to spit out the same amount of pollution unless it's heavily weighted, and then it'll put out more per trip. And then the argument is financial. If you use transit, you actually save money. At least that's how it should be designed. And the way that that works is that people pay into it and they can all save, right? It's like carpooling, but actually like organized and a little bit more safe, because I've seen carpooling apps try to work and they just don't work the same way that transit does. So the conveniency is a factor. So it's not 4 trips per day, it's 4 trips per hour, right? That's the goal. But we don't know what the costs of 4 trips per hour is. It might be 2 trips per hour, but that's still worth it. And that's still something me and my kids hop on around here, right? Just to go to the pool or go to the grocery store or whatever. So there are things that we can do to make that work, but we have to know what that looks like first. And I think that's the overall value, because I think it can be surprising what we'd be able to achieve if we're able to put some of that effort behind something like that, because it is a solution for a lot of the household cost issues. There is a cost to everyone in taxation, but the more it's used on the aggregate, it will probably save in trips. All right, thanks.
Dr. Boyko.
Thank you very much for the comments, Director Jack. And thank you, Chair. I lived in 2 places. I lived in Victoria when I was going to engineering school, where I would take the bus every day. And I worked in Calgary, where I could walk outside my house, jump on a bus, and they would go every 5 minutes during rush hour to get people to work downtown. That worked well. Everybody's happy. We're in big urban environments. Transit works. Bringing it out to rural environments is a whole different animal, and I agree with you that 1 per hour might not be sufficient. 1 every 5 minutes is way too much. But at the same time, if we're going to ask taxpayers in this area to pay for a system, we want to gauge what they want and ensure that they want the transit system in there, and the ACRD is not forcing it on people that do not want it. So we'll have to gauge good interest of what the people in Beaver Creek and Sproul Lake and potentially Cherry Creek in the future as well want to have happen in their area. Thank you.
Dr. Roth.
Yeah, and also I thank you for that, Director Boyko. That's what I think too. I also think that we really need to look at our local demographics, because a lot of people I don't know what the percentage is, but they don't work and they wouldn't be using transit for work in the rural areas. If they're going to the grocery store, how do they carry things back? I mean, there's just all kinds of things that people wouldn't use transfer for. It would just be too inconvenient. It is a way different living in a rural area. And I don't want to be paying for something that's not going to be used, or watching a bus go down the road with one or no people on it every day. It just doesn't make sense.
Hey, any final questions or comments? Dr. Jack?
Yeah, just on that, I think there is utility, because what I see on the buses are a mixture of youth and elders who use the buses. And they do use it for getting to appointments and getting groceries and that sort of thing. It's not, most elders don't really grub up by getting a whole cart. That's really like a middle-aged to parent thing. What I see are mostly older folks grabbing their fresh ingredients and then heading back home. So it really depends on what you're looking at. From an elder's perspective, I remember some of the arguments against garbage, where that elders couldn't get their garbage cans up the hill. And I think it's the opposite for this. A lot of elders won't be able to drive as often as they could, or they may not have someone who can really do that anymore. And relying on something like public transit is something that a lot of older folks do, as well as younger folks. The missing middle part is really a challenge, because usually in an environment like this, getting to work is less so, unless they work downtown or at a bank or something like that. So it's, especially for rural environments, you're looking at something where older folks and younger folks would rely on it at first. But given the way that demographics are, you might see that younger folks, the ages extend over time, just because they can't make the math work on what they get paid and how much vehicles cost. So those are the kind of things that I'm worried about. It's not necessarily now, it's about future planning and looking at the demographics in different communities. I think Director Boyko is probably in the safest position of not ever needing it, because of the rural farming aspect there. But if we're going to keep subdividing Cherry Creek or Beaver Creek or Sprout Lake, then you're going to see higher density, and then different situations arise through that. And we have to forward plan that. And I think the argument isn't necessarily that we're going to do it, but rather we should do a study to see what it would actually cost, and we can compare that to demographics in the future. We might not do it for some regions in the next 10 years. I would love for something to happen between Bamfield, Hawaiian, and Port Alberni, but we don't have the economics yet. But that may change over the next X number of years, depending on how quickly Bamfield and Hawaiian want to expand, right? So I think there are considerations here. I don't think anybody wants to force it on anyone, but I do think that we need the information to make an informed decision. And I think that's worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you. I've just been listening in on the Health Network meeting that's going at the same time. And I mentioned that, I'd like to see a lot of the conversation today is around the transit that just opened up on the West Coast, and how it's been identified through the Health Network as the #1 issue on health indicators that would improve lives was transportation. And everybody is so excited on the West Coast that this is now a reality for their community. There's a lot of youth workers that are on the Health Network engagement there, looking to better the mental health, and drugs and addiction is rampant in the high schools as well. This could be a changer. Like, you need to make opportunities for youth. You also need to make opportunities available for seniors and for everyone. People that don't have money can't afford to jump on a bus and go to a free event, go grocery shopping, and they're not going to have a lot of money to bring home armfuls of bags of groceries. So I just am so supportive of this for communities. I think that it's really important. The Health Network has an article that they wanted to share. So I'll send it out in an email to all of the board here to share. We did a study a couple of years ago on what it would cost for people to take transit the way that it is now. So I'll share that with everybody. And hopefully you'll see what the Health Network has provided for this board. And I'm hoping, can we send the study to the high school to see? And was there a demographics provision that you can see who's actually submitting into the study? Thanks.
I can definitely answer that. So the high school, the board was one of our stakeholders, and we had sent them the survey, but there was some back and forth, and it was unsure whether or not they could actually share it. That being said, they are one of our stakeholders on our main stakeholder list, and so we do want to have them at the workshop, give them the opportunity to provide input, and maybe work with them to see if there's anything else we can do to collect some of that, collect some information. It is interesting that you bring that up because I believe Director Cote, you also mentioned, the level of engagement from youth. And actually, we did ask a question on the survey in terms of your age group, and the amount of people who were age 24 and under was very small, somewhere under 10%, I believe. And so we haven't seen a lot of engagement from youth as of yet. We're going to be reposting a lot of the survey information on platforms like Instagram, our social medias, to try to get the youth a little bit more engaged at this point. And as I mentioned, we also want to talk with the board more to see what else we can do. But yeah, the level of engagement from youth so far has been low. I believe the largest group, most of our respondents would have been between the ages of 35 and 65 years old. That was over 50%, maybe 75% of our respondents were in that age group. So we want to hear more from the youth about the project.
It would be interesting to share this with the Health Network and ask them to do some outreach, because they are working with the underprivileged communities, trying to make life better for those areas. So I'll connect with Marcy, or maybe you can, and because there's a number of youth workers that actually participate with the table of partners. Thank you.
I'm also going to encourage all the directors to share the survey on there. You have a Facebook page, if you could just share it and try and get it out, because we only have one more week, and I would really like to increase that participation as much as possible. Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to find the survey myself without the link. It's not on the Let's Connect ACRD page at all. And if I'm just Googling BC Beaver Creek Transit Study, it doesn't exist. So you have to make it easy for people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the link you just sent us, make a QR code, post it so people can take a picture and do it, make it as easy as possible. But I don't know why it's not on the Let's Connect ACRD page. Thank you.
Maybe just make a note of that, Heather, and if it's on there, you could send it out to us. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, Victor. I think we had a good conversation today, and you've got some things that you need to work on, and we'll look forward to seeing the results of the final survey, and we'll see you soon, I hope.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've been taking some notes as we've been going through. There's been a lot of good information and feedback. Yes, we will be back. We want to make sure that the things that we're putting in the plan are priorities that are in line with both the board and what the council would like to see. And so, yeah, we will be back in a month or two to share a little bit more in terms of our engagement results and look at that our plans for the final transit future service plan. So thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, next under reports, we have a report on the 2023 Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center for the landfill and reports for information. And Paul is going to be talking about this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning again to the group. I'll just start with a brief preamble before I get into presentation. So what you'll see here is a report over the entire Alberni Valley waste shed, something that we require under the Ministry of Environment and the Environmental Management Act, as well as a more wholesome look at everything that we do within the Alberni Valley and Bamfield area, not strictly just focused on the landfill. So I'm going to open up the presentation, and what we'll do is we'll go over the brief overview, go through the different sections. I'll pause in a few spots there for Q&A, and then we'll open it up for feedback and Q&A at the end. So just bear with me a second. I'm just going to hit screen share. And okay, so you should see a title screen in front of you. Hopefully that's working.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. All right, let's jump right into it. So we'll be going through a series of slides here. It's about 17 slides all told, going over the mission and targets, solid waste disposal in general. We're looking at some different metrics that we calculate over a 5-year average, which includes also the most recent year, 2023. It's how we measure our trends. We'll be looking at waste diversion, landfill capacity, finances, brief takeaways on environmental monitoring, operations, and a summary of projects that we did in 2023 and what's on the docket as well. Committee members will note that we do have the full reports attached as part of the agenda. So if there's some more detailed questions, we can get into those later. This won't be designed as strictly the key takeaways, and we'll go from there. So I always review this with everyone for the group here, our metrics that we target when we're talking about what we're doing with the landfill and what we're doing as far as all of our programs are concerned. We're trying to reduce our landfill disposal to less than 400 kilograms per person per capita. We're trying to boost our waste diversion to 50%. We're trying to minimize the airspace consumption ratio. What that is what's left in going into the landfill, how much can you densify in 1 cubic meter of space. The more you densify, the more space you have, the longer the landfill lasts. We look at financial contributions for capital funding, look at our environmental criteria for leachate against freshwater aquatic life criteria, as well as landfill gas generation. So the first slide is our solid waste disposal. As mentioned, over 5 years, you'll see here that we have our target of 400 kilograms per capita. We've been trending generally downward with the exception of 2021 and reached our lowest yet of 548 kilograms per capita of waste last year. Now, what that was is the actual waste, once you've diverted what you can right now, that is actually going into the physical landfill. You'll notice a couple of the key takeaways. The spike that we see in 2021 had to do with the height of the COVID pandemic. The irony is that during that pandemic, there was a lot more waste generation, waste disposal at our landfill. But generally what we're seeing is over the last 5 years, we've been slowly trending downward. And it also highlights that there is opportunity to divert more, which we'll get into in the next slides. Generally, as a makeup in the background of what we see for waste in the Alberni Valley, it's broken up between about 40% residential. The remaining amount is commercial and construction demolition materials. Next slide. So this is a trend that breaks down further our different materials that we highlight. So we're looking at what's being disposed of. As you can see, residential has dropped somewhat steadily over the last 5 years, somewhat plateaued for last year. Commercial is somewhat the same as we go along here. We have a combination of asbestos-containing material, ocean cleanup material from cleanup, small amounts there, and construction demolition material. So the 3 bars that you're seeing, the residential, commercial, and construction demolition, those are the highest portions of tonnage that we see for waste going actually into the landfill itself. Overall, that makes up a total of last year, our lowest amount, about 14,800 tons of waste per year. Typically, what we've seen in the past is we're around the 16,000 100,000 mark. The goal again is we're trying to minimize this, reduce this as much as possible. Next two slides, and I'll pause shortly after this, gets into waste diversion. The first slide will show you here the different materials that we see diversion rates on the left-hand side, where the largest proportion that we see is organics diversion from curbside and self-haul, yard and yarn waste, as well as private organics also. What we're seeing generally is the other materials, such as our recycled BC materials, are somewhat steady. Mattresses, stewardship programs, we see roughly about 800 tons or so of material that will divert. And what we'll also see here is back on the organics, we had quite a large spike last year, or sorry, in 2022, that took us up to 31%. And that was largely due to the organics program, as well as a large surge in private commercial organics that went to earth, land, and sea to create compost. That was due to large surges of fish waste material. We didn't see that much of that this year in 2023. So excluding that private commercial piece, generally our trends are going up, but we did keep the commercial piece in here as a comparison. On the right-hand side is simply the chart that shows our target of 50%. And where we're at for waste diversion, again, showing we're roughly at about the 29% mark, a lot of opportunity to go up further. The next slide are the numbers. Briefly, just the takeaway here, you'll see the top chart shows the residential, commercial, other, and construction demolition breakdown. As mentioned before, about 40% residential waste and about 50-some-odd% commercial waste. Some of the other takeaways further down, we note that organics and yard waste collection, we were down about 3,300 tons last year, and that's largely due to the private hauling of commercial fish waste to the earth, land, and sea compound. Overall, curbside organics that we saw in the city of Port Alberni stayed fairly consistent. And we saw roughly the same amount of self-hauled like clean wood waste and yard and garden waste, about 560 tons all total. The breakdown of these are located here in the diversion chart, as you can see here. And you can see that slug of the tonnage of fish waste that dropped down to this smaller amount that we see on this side. Everything else remained fairly consistent as far as diversion was concerned, though we did see a lower amount of diversion that came in for tonnage. And over and above the organics waste piece, one of the things we did note is that the closure of the highway due to the Cameron Bluffs fire did see some interruption in recycling services. So we did note during waste composition that there's some recyclables that wound up showing up in our waste during that approximately 1 to 2 month period. So I'm just going to pause for a quick second and see if anyone has any questions on this. Otherwise, okay.
Director Sparrow, then Director Boyko. Go ahead, Director Sparrow.
Thank you for that. I have a few questions regarding the commercial construction demolition waste. That seems to be more than 50% of what we're going to landfill. So what programs do you have? What programs do you put in the future to reduce the commercial waste going to a landfill? That is our biggest problem.
Thank you, Director Sparrow, through the chair to you and the group. A great question. The programs that we have right now in place, it's twofold. We have some bin capability to take commercial divertibles at our Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center, things like cardboard and small scale recycling piece there. But the larger scale piece of commercial and construction waste diversion, that's a topic that we're addressing through the solid waste management plan update to install some sort of infrastructure piece, whatever that'll look like, for people to easily divert. We've done a great job on the residential side, but the focus now needs to look at that higher tonnage rate of construction demolition, and that's going to be part of our large engagement process here. So nothing larger in place right now. We just have the smaller programs that are available at the Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center.
Thank you. Second question: what do you know about foam, like foam bedding, foam mattresses, things like that that you cannot compact down to get your tonnage down for space wise because they're just foam that keeps going back. And another part of that is styrofoam. What do you do with the fluffies you get, which are when you run over styrofoam, it becomes just airborne as it were. So what are we going to do about A, foam and B, styrofoam to try and get other numbers? Thank you.
Thank you again. So a couple of items. Talking about the foam, what I heard there was related to mattresses and things like that. As you're correctly pointed out, that material is not conducive to landfilling, and it's a high volume piece that needs to be diverted. We've been running a program of mattress diversion through INEO Recycling or INEO Counseling Services and their offshoot Recycle Matters. So they've actually been processing mattresses that are collected within the valley, which we collect over at our Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center, as well as the West Coast landfill. And that's been the venue for that. So what they'll do is they'll take those mattresses out and they search for markets to go and actually pull the foam out and compact it and send it off. That's one of the things that's being addressed right now. As far as styrofoam is concerned, there's two pieces. Residential styrofoam is able to be collected at drop-off locations, and that's at the Bamfield transfer station, the 3rd Avenue Depot, and the Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center. For the commercial side of it, which I think is more what you're aiming for, we do have a program in place where we're contracted with a firm to come in and collect commercial styrofoam. It is kept separate outside of the residential program because of the Recycle BC program. But we do have availability to take that styrofoam, and it is collected through a contractor who will densify it and send it off to reprocess it into moldings. So that's what we have in place there.
Any other questions, Dr. Sparrow? Thank you. Director Boyko, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Mike, did you have another question? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So in recycling here, we're trying to get down the residential portion of it too. So the blue bin program is no longer applicable. What do you plan on doing in the future regarding waste disposal for the rural areas?
Great question again. Three-stream program, waste diversion program, is something that's very high on our list. And again, it leans back to the solid waste management plan update. As you know, we did an initial look a couple of years ago to get the flavor of what would be of interest to the general public for getting some form of three-stream. That's something that's going to be revisited again, and by that I mean through the management plan, we're going to go through an engagement process to see what the best way is to capture organics and capture recyclables. We obviously have the start in the Beaver Creek, Sechot, and Hoop-Chesset area, but it's the question of addressing that in the other rural areas as well. There are opportunities to install curbside recycling through work with Recycle BC, but it's going to be a larger piece that we're going to be working through as part of the engagement with the solid waste management plan. So I don't have a specific piece for you yet, but that's something that we're working on.
Thank you. Director Boyko, then Director Coots. Go ahead, Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just want to make sure I just heard that correctly. So the three-stream recycling thing that was overwhelmingly opposed 2 years ago, we're going to go back and revisit that in a different form. Was that what I just heard there correctly?
Thank you, Director Boyko. That is correct. While we don't see, as we heard from the survey, we don't see curbside as that form of three-stream waste diversion. What we do see is there's still a need to divert that waste. We'll talk a little bit about it when we get to waste composition, because we're still seeing that material show up. So there's going to have to be some form of three-stream collection in order to divert that waste, whether that is a depot, whether that is some form of curbside, whether it's something else, not sure, but that's what we're revisiting, what the options are.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're going to be very open to the public, that we're going to revisit this in a different form, but at the same time, I want to make it very clear to the board that what the people have is they have their own systems, and if there's still some improvement to be done, we can look at that, but forcing people off their private collection or whatever they're doing into a ACRD government sponsored garbage system out here will not be very welcome by anybody in Beaufort specifically. And I'm sure the other directors can talk about their areas as well. That wasn't my main question though. My main question was how we increased the price per bag from 2 years ago from $2 to $3, and now it's $5. So we've done 150% increase in the actual drop-off cost per bag. And I was going to say, how are we actually seeing a drop-off in people dropping off bags as opposed to burning their garbage or something like that because of this huge cost increase that has affected people? But I don't even know if we're going to capture that because these waste diversion numbers all show everything's going down. And I'd like to explore that a bit more, how the numbers are going down versus waste from pickup, from commercial pickups, from the city drop-offs, and from people dropping off bags. Are we seeing a decreased number of bags coming in because of the increased cost? And it's hard to say that it's due to the increased cost or it's due to increased diversion. But I just want to explore that a bit more because that cost increase is very huge directly on taxpayers. Thank you. That are trying to do.
Thank you, Director. We'll take that away.
Thank you, Director Coots, then Director Jack. Please go ahead, Director Coots.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question in regards to the Recycle Matters program and the costs of it. I myself have actually used that program living in town. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's fantastic. I don't know offhand what the price changes have gone through, if there has been any in the last year. I know about last year it was $20 to drop off a mattress, and I believe perhaps maybe 40 or so for both the mattress and a box spring. I was just wondering, is there do we offer vouchers in a similar fashion to the large bulky waste in Bamfield for people in town, for those who may not be able to afford that cost? Or is that, is that something that already exists? Have we considered perhaps putting that into an option for those to help kind of offset that and reduce more? And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Director. So that's twofold. The short answer is no, we don't have a voucher system in place for mattress recycling within the town. Everything is based on revenue, offsetting the cost for processing mattresses. The Bamfield example that you're talking about was a matter of offsetting cost for a small amount of tipping fee vouchers, as opposed to the cost of hauling that amount of waste from Bamfield and back again. So that was a distance piece. The Recycle Matters program in town actually is related subject of a larger provincial-wide stewardship program. So mattress recycling is coming up on the Ministry of Environment's guidelines. They're planning on putting in a legislation piece in 2025, I believe it is. So the idea behind that is there will be a reduction or removal of any sort of tipping fee for mattresses in the future once a stewardship program is in place. In other words, producer pay. Right now, that doesn't exist. And we're very fortunate to have a contractor that does process mattresses in the Alberni Valley throughout the West Coast, and actually works with areas around the island as well. So that's something that we're working on right now. But back to your original question, no, there's no voucher to offset costs for processing mattresses here within the valley.
Thank you so very much for that clarification.
No worries.
Thank you, Director Jack.
Yeah, I had a quick, I think a quick comment and then a question. I think getting the diversion rates up to the target level is something that we should try to achieve within the next term of office, I think. I think that will help us navigate the considerations around the landfill with our relationship with CSHOT, and I think that's my primary concern and will always be. That being said, I would note that we measure the disposal rate and the diversion rate in terms of kilogram, so by mass. Are there ways where, because it seems pretty clear that the not three stream was rejected, but curbside pickup was rejected. And I think we can rely on members, on residents of all of the areas really believing in the idea that waste diversion is really important, right? I imagine most folks have their own places for food waste and organics and that sort of thing. And I think the recycling is quite important as well. I'm wondering from a bang for the buck perspective in terms of measuring mass, And I think part of it is also volume, unless we're crushing everything. So I think there's a density consideration here that I wouldn't mind us contemplating. Are there things that we can ask our more rural residents to focus on diverting away that give the best bang for the buck? Like cardboard's easy to deal with. Is that something, or is it aluminum cans, or is it like I know we have mattresses as a separate thing, but there's also unique differences in terms of the types of waste that are generated in more rural areas as well. Can we differentiate the types of waste to really focus some effort for residents in rural areas to get that greater bang for the buck? Because I think their waste generation will be way different as well. So um, I don't know if there's an answer to that, but I think that talking about mass, I've just been kicked off from talking. The but I think mass and volume, I think there's a relationship there that we need to talk about, but I'm no expert, of course. Thank you.
No, thank you, Director Jack. And I don't have a quick answer for you, but yes, that's something that, again, subject of that whole piece. You're right. There's opportunity to divert a lot of those materials, and I'll talk a little bit around waste education later on here. There's opportunity to highlight a lot of those, again, the popular materials that we see coming in that can be diverted. So looking for ways to divert those, closer to home, reuse them, those kinds of things there. So definitely something to look into.
Thank you, Director Boyko.
Chair, I just want to clarify, talk about what Director Jack just mentioned there, and I think that's a good idea to explore, is instead of trying to force something on the rural residents that they very much oppose, educate them and give them more specific examples rather than just kilograms and things like that. Say, hey, we're having too many tin cans come in here. We're having too much cardboard. We're having too much organics. Get into more specifics. And I know we're paying for these studies. We're paying for people to go through the garbage and look through it. But more details and education, I think, is a good way to go. And I agree that would be beneficial to have. Thank you.
Dr. Jack?
Yeah, just to clarify too, like I think there's already some diversion happening in those communities that might, if we find a way for some sort of way to verify that reporting, because I know that there's a bunch of composters out there, right? And if they're doing it on their own, are we just counting what we're doing? Or are we counting what the community's doing? And I don't know what that looks like either. Um, but I'd imagine there may be some incentives for farmers to keep track of that kind of thing, maybe. I know that I would probably, if I was a provincial government, give some sort of rebate based on stuff you do on your farm, right? But I don't know. I don't even know if that exists. But are there ways that we can count that towards it? Because it's not necessarily just what the ACRD staff are doing, and I really appreciate that. But there's also individual efforts that if we can make it a part of a campaign um, to inform what's going on, then at least we can kind of hit some of those numbers with a little more of the realistic behaviors as well that I think we are seeing. And honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing some competition between neighborhoods. I'm thinking that would be something that can be beneficial, especially since that's how apparently they've moved a lot of the energy usage down in a lot of neighborhoods that compare to other houses in the neighborhood and in various jurisdictions. And something like that might be something we can track if it's not too much effort. I just thinking of incentives to keep people having this in mind. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, please go ahead, Paula.
Okay. Oh, great discussion. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that. Next one. So this one is a snapshot again of specifically the City of Port Alberni curbside collection, comparing 2022, year one of the program, to 2023. And that's covering off 67 households roughly within the city. Just the key takeaways that we see is organics diversion is actually fairly steady. We saw a little over 2,000 tons in 2022 and roughly the same in 2023. What we do note is that garbage did drop and recycling did go up. They're smaller tonnages, but they did increase, which is pushing us in the right direction. So it's a good highlight of how successful the program is. And, the general push then will be back on actually what we just discussed regarding, how do we push the needle for diversion again in the other communities. The next one, and this is a nice meaty one. So this is a summary of the waste composition audit that we conducted last year. And so just as a brief overview, what we did is we did this over in the Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center, as well as the West Coast landfill as well. And so what happened was we pulled in representative sampling from various areas, brought them in and did a conglomerate look to see what's actually going in the garbage. In other words, what's in our garbage in an example load that goes into the landfill. And then out of that garbage load, what could actually be diverted? And that's the piece that we focused on last year. So just looking at the numbers real briefly, some of our highlights, we see that the top category for what went into the garbage, again, recognizing it's a snapshot in time, is we saw approximately 39% of organics, which is made up of a mix of non-compostable and compostable organics. What that means is specifically non-compostable is, say, textiles and dirty wood. That winds up getting landfilled. Compostable material that we look at are more around food waste, yard waste, the things that we're actually trying to divert with the organics processing capacity that we have right now. Recyclables made up the next portion, which is about 27% or so for paper and plastic, with some small amounts of metal, glass, household hazardous waste like the little aerosols, things like that, household hygiene products, and a little bit of electronic waste. So out of that, if we flip over to the right-hand side, what we see is out of that, 48% of that still remains as garbage going into the landfill, but it highlights 52% remaining, the compostable, recyclable material, product stewardship materials such as electronics, and reuse, which ironically is some of the textile material. There are opportunities that can be explored to divert that material. So there are low-hanging fruit if you want to think about removing tonnage out of the landfill. Those are some of the things that we can highlight. And some of the highest diversion potential that we saw. I will pause for a second there, see if anyone has any questions on the waste composition audit. Again, this was holistically combining everything with curbside, self-haul, single family. But in case any has any questions, please go ahead.
Director Boyko, then Director Jack.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the little diversion numbers here. One of the biggest problems in the area I live is getting rid of glass and metal, because Beaver Creek has basically curbside recycling once every 2 weeks, but they don't take that. So we have to make special trips for glass, specifically glass jars and that kind of thing. When I lived in other communities, that was all included. How can we get that included in our recycling stream to make the end user not have to drive those big piles of glass once a month, once a year, whenever they do it, into town to dispose of them? Or they're just throwing the garbage and say, screw it, because the ACRD doesn't have a way to deal with that. But other communities do. So what can we do to make that change? Thank you.
Thank you, Director. The biggest thing that we see is, because it is a residential program under Recycle BC, they can't take that curbside unless you literally change the truck, switch over to a partition type of truck so that you can keep that material separate. Reason that they separate those things, glass, some of the metal, you are able to put in metal containers, your food containers, within curbside. And actually other things such as flexible plastics and styrofoam, is those bind up the far end, the actual recycling assembly line down the way. So there are two options: whether you're doing strictly curbside for single stream, which is the material that we're talking about here, and keeping those glass, the flexible materials in a depot setting so that they're actually isolated, and when they go to the recycling facility, they stay isolated, or changing the mechanism of the truck so that it's collected separately and it stays separate all the way down to the far end when it reaches the recycling facility on the mainland. So those are realistically the options.
So we have our own vehicles, the ACRD has, and we can do some contracting with other people in different areas to do the pickup. Moving forward, to make it easier for the end user, because we're hoping that this whole population and people keep going here for the next couple decades and generation, can we make a plan to put that separation at the curbside in place so the end user doesn't have to make separate trips to get rid of glass and keep it out of landfills and make their lives easier? Because it does exist in other communities, and I've used it, and it's a hell of a lot easier than what we have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And I'll just, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'll just comment on that. That again, that'll be part of the solid waste management plan update, which way we want to go as far as any sort of changes are concerned. Because then we would be engaging Recycle BC to say, we want to make this change. Let's see how that will work. So that's the quickest response I have for that.
Thank you, Director Jack.
Yeah, I had two questions. First question is, are you going into more detail on the diversion opportunities, especially in maybe reiterating, because I may have missed it, what product stewardship is? And then the other one is, I've had a few questions in regards to different types of batteries, especially phone batteries. Are these things that are classified as electronic waste, or are they hazardous? Because a lot of phone batteries now seem like they're more hazardous than not. And just what are the considerations about the different types of batteries that are out there now? So thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Director. I captured the last one, so I'll start there. And I guess generally talking about stewardship, but I'll focus specifically on the battery example because that's pretty good. There's a stewardship program called Call to Recycle, and so there's a diversion opportunity there where we can take in any of those batteries, including the cell phone batteries if they're detached. Cell phone recycling itself is kept separate. It's a different type of program, but specifically batteries. Those household batteries are able to be collected in key areas such as the Third Ave Depot, such as the AV, and they're literally boxed up. They're, residents bring them in, they bag them in, and it goes to the same group, the Call to Recycle group, which will break everything down for metals. So those cell phone batteries can be included in that same program, provided they're separated. If they're collected within the cell phone itself, then it's strictly putting the cell phone over to a separate stewardship program. And then stewardship in general, and just for any that are confused by that word, because it's an interesting one. Stewardship literally means producer pay. But the province of BC has a requirement for certain types of products under the recycling regulation for the producer to pay for the disposal, etc., or the take back of a lot of those materials. So there are different products like the batteries that we just talked about where eco fees are included. Some don't have eco fees, such as mattresses that we talked about earlier. But that's what is put in place so that ideally it is supposed to 100% fund the take back of programs. Typically, they do not because each region is different. So it's more of an offsetting of costs. And each of those materials are kept separately. You've got smoke alarms and batteries are kept separate into different programs. You've got the deposits. Electronics goes into a specific spot. There's something for small appliances, large fridges and dryers that you see. That is a large appliance recycling program. But the takeaway is that each of those programs are set up to provide the consumer, here's a spot that you can go to drop off those materials free of charge, and they're using the eco fee in the background to take that material back. That's how that works. So I hope that clarifies what you were aiming for stewardship, Director.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. Next slide talks about landfill capacity. So this is the lifespan of the actual landfill. So we do surveys on an annual basis, and we're attempting to densify as much as we can of the leftover waste that goes into each cell. What you're seeing here are a snapshot of some of the different cells and how landfill construction actually works. So what we do is we reassess, we do an aerial survey, and we compare our density factors, and we plug that in based on all of those factors to find out how much life is remaining left in the landfill if everything is staying exactly as it is. We're still in the same range of a roughly 65 plus years of useful life in the landfill. That will obviously change and actually increase as you divert more material. If more material is being diverted and you're densifying more, that means that that asset, that landfill, winds up lasting longer. We did note that we're increasing slowly in airspace utilization. We did see a drop off last year in density, and that had to do with a large filling around the top plateau that we're at currently for the landfill itself. We see less density on the side when we're drilling into our slopes. So that's something we're reassessing on how we can better calculate that and give more representative numbers, because we do see high density in the center of the cells within the landfill when we do different snapshots of the site. So this just basically highlights, in theory, how long the landfill would last based on everything that sits here right now. And you'll see these change on an ongoing basis each year. Next slide. Getting into finances, just a quick snapshot where we have two pieces that we target here. We capture our operating costs for landfill operations, for solid waste in general throughout the valley and Bamfield, so our administration education costs, recycling and organics processing, what the total cost is for the entire solid waste service, recoveries, which are typically your recyclables and user fees, those kinds of things, and any net, the actual net cost of operating the site and the entire solid waste system, including our depots and collection services. As you'll note, we have a reserve funds allocation piece, so that leads into the right-hand side, which is requirement that we have under legislation. We need to be putting away money on an annual basis for closure and post-closure of the landfill. Once the landfill closes, you don't walk away from it. There is environmental monitoring that is required to ensure that the site does not contaminate the surrounding environment, as it were. And that's what you see here on the orange bars going all the way across. That is a cost that we put away on an annual basis into our reserve fund. And then we have our capital costs. So we allocate, we also have capital costs they put away for specific projects that we're looking at, whether we're doing infrastructure upgrades or we're working on what's called progressive closure of the landfill. As you build a hill, you close certain sections of the landfill to put in impermeable cover, ideally keep clean water clean, seal off that area, normal waste goes into that portion of the landfill, and you continue filling in other spots. And that's what that capital fund is for. I'm going to stop because I do see a question from Director Boyko.
Go ahead, Director Boyko.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder about the recovery cost. Do we have a breakdown on how much is commercial versus how much is people and dropping off bags? Like, is there a further breakdown there on how that's working out?
Yeah, I can bring that back here. I don't have the full detail in front of me right now, but I can bring that back. The bulk of that is from revenue through recyclables and all that sort of thing there. So what we get back from Recycle BC, any of the offset from commercial, tipping fees are outside of this piece here. This is strictly just those typical numbers, but I can bring back a more detailed background for the group for sure.
Yeah, I'd like to see a bit more breakdown in costs and revenues rather than just a total number, like, and how that's increased over the last 5 years or something like that, just for an overall trend. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. This is just a quick snapshot of the environmental monitoring program. We do have the large report attached, but just a brief breakdown of where the site is, how sampling works. We collect, obviously, the leachate on the system. We have a large SCADA pumping system, and we discharge the leachate through a discharge pipe into the City of Port Alberni wastewater treatment lagoon. We track our volumes on a regular basis. Last year, we discharged approximately a little under 300,000 cubic meters of leachate into the wastewater lagoon. Water quality is sampled on a quarterly basis and then reported out, which again, that's part of the attached report. And landfill contractor visually monitors for any alarms for the day-to-day operation piece. And then the next slide is specifically the select leachate parameters that we look at. Key takeaways for this slide, going back in time, is we did an upgrade on our leachate control system, updating what's called our SCADA system. That's our instrumentation. and working on additional pumping structures. So aside from the spike when we brought it online in 2020, you'll note that we've been trending downward for key criteria that we test for, as well as the City of Port Alberni. And I see a question.
Director Cote?
Thank you. So what would that spike represent? Thank you.
Great question. That spike represented sampling from the inlet lagoon, showed us the effect of bringing the pumps online, as well as we were in the middle of that heat dome back in 2020, 2021. Low volume, we see low volume of water. What we see is higher concentration in those materials. And then once the system came online, as you can see, the spikes continued downward as we've been going through. Okay.
Follow up. So was there any harm to the environment, or did we have to do any type of cleanup?
No, not at all. With the upgrades that we did with the pumping system, the idea is keeping everything contained into the leachate lagoon so that it discharged straight down through the pipe. This is merely highlighting the sampling that we pulled from the inlet of that pipe. So nothing escape containment.
Good news.
Okay, next slide. Just briefly, this is a tracking piece for landfill gas monitoring. We're under legislation to ensure that we stay below 1,000 tons of methane and generated from the landfill. And the way to do that is you are looking at fuel emissions. That's usually a small piece there, but the big piece is the waste. Either you're going to put in an active gas capture system, which is extremely expensive, or you're diverting the waste that actually creates the methane in the first place under an anaerobic condition. And that's organics diversion. That's why we've pushed it so much. For this one, we noted that we had about 860 tons of methane generated. That number has actually been dropping over the last couple of years. And largely thanks to the diversion of fresh organics going into the landfill, there's still opportunity to divert more of that material there, but we're going in the right direction. Other than that, operators are still working with their vehicle operations to ensure efficiency as far as greenhouse gas emissions are concerned. It's a smaller piece, but something that I'm very conscious of. And we wrapped up a program last year with Vancouver Island University with established landfill gas monitoring sensors, which are located in key points around the landfill. So that's just a quick summary on that. Next one is public feedback that we had, as well as staff feedback out at the site. We have no documented issues with dust, noise, traffic, litter, odor, or wildlife attractants. The landfill staff have been doing a great job of keeping everything as tidy and clean as they possibly can. It's quite a job. We did have a lot of questions and concerns around glass bottles disposal, disposal of asbestos. There are several forms that are required when you're going and disposing of asbestos-containing material. Sorry. When you're doing renos or when commercial firms are doing larger structure projects. Lots of questions on batteries, ironically, very similar to what Director Jack talked about earlier. And a lot of questions on cardboard, more the commercial cardboard piece, because we do have the ability to divert some commercial cardboard out at the site. Generally, we heard great reviews from some of the folks in the public, liking the organization of the site, liking the upgrades that we did a few years ago. And, a lot of it had to do with, a lot of it was waste education, highlighting the Sort and Go app, being able to answer those questions and highlighting, what actually the landfill is, because it gets back to we're now not just the landfill. We're a large diversion center. We're the Sort and Go center in one word. And we did highlight a couple of items that operators noted where there's opportunity still to divert large bulky items that they're seeing that creates challenges with compaction landfilling and large plastic coverings from boats. So some items that we can target and look at for opportunities for waste diversion. And I'll pause. I see a question.
Director Cote?
Thank you. Are we any further ahead with the recycling of RVs?
Thanks for the question. There's still a pilot going on, working with INYO. They've done a couple of experiments with the RVs, and it looks like it's still on the drawing board. They've tried a couple. It looks like it's quite a lot involved, so nothing clear yet. We're looking at other options to see what might make sense. Last couple of slides will be just the project, so I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. So projects in 2023, as I mentioned earlier, we completed the VIU landfill gas monitoring partnership and left behind the permanent sensors that are mounted on the landfill. We started the first phase of our solid waste management plan update. That's our biggest project. Compiled the advisory committee, conducted multiple meetings, an additional survey that's set out, and started into the system review. We've been working continuously with the landfill working group, that's ACRD and SASHOT members, meeting quarterly throughout 2023. It's installed some additional new monitoring wells, put together a tipping fee waiver, and developed a terms of reference as well. We resurveyed our monitoring wells, something that you do every 5 years to keep in mind where everything is with your reference points to the landfill, if anything has shifted, and ensure everything is still consistent. We conducted our waste composition study, which I discussed earlier. Waste education was focused primarily in contractor-led initiatives, community presentations, info booths, and online engagement through social media platforms. We conducted our aerial survey. We do this annually during December and January, and that's actually the survey that you see up in the top here. And we've been working through airspace consumption, as we talked about earlier. We also completed a tipping fee review. And the last project that we completed last year was a successful opening of the 3rd Avenue reuse store, which has been it's still in pilot phase, but has been working really well. And we're seeing new materials go through on a regular basis. It focuses specifically on materials that you don't see in a lot of other reuse spots, such as furniture, fixtures, other items such as that. And sorry, I did see you, Director Cote.
Go ahead, Director Cote.
Thank you. So in the report there, it says waste educator onboarding. So the ACRD has hired a waste education group. Can you give us some information on that?
I can, and actually that'll lead right into the next slide. So what we have on the go? We've hired on a new waste education group called Let's Talk Trash. They are going to be assisting us, and actually are assisting us right now with working through outreach activities, working on our social media, our Recollect platform, and the big thing is working on mentoring community champions in not just the AV and the Bamfield area, but the West Coast also. Because one of the biggest things that we saw that we needed is that we needed to have that physical presence out there. We need somebody that's able to be out there, embedded in the community, and that's where this group really excels. So we're really pleased to have them on board and have kicked off several initiatives right off the bat. And yeah, we've had them meet quite a lot of our contractors and get some of the do's and don'ts, things that we're looking at to inform people on. That's where we're at.
So was this part of our budget process? I'm not familiar with that. So, or is it already embedded as part of the education? I know that part of the Bulldog program outreach came from the education budget in the past for the from this solid waste budget. So thank you.
So yes, the waste education budget that includes the contract with Let's Talk Trash team. That's what that indicates. And you talked earlier about the Bulldogs. We have worked with the Bulldogs in the past. That was part of previous year's budget. That's not included in specifically the solid waste budget this year.
Thank you, Director Roth.
Yeah, I'm curious about the landfill working group. And just noting that the landfill is located close to homes in Tishat First Nation. Can you comment on any efforts made to find another area to locate the landfill?
Thank you, Director. Yes, so we've been working with the landfill working group for quite a number, well, a year and a half now, and that's one of the subjects. So we're actually working with them to conduct, it's going to be likely a provincially funded desktop exercise to conduct a siting assessment on the landfill. Where in theory could it actually go if it were not going to be there? So that's something that we're assessing with the group. We've been working closely with them on that project.
Thank you.
Okay.
Seeing no more questions, please go ahead, Paula.
Okay, last slide. I'll try to be quicker here. So the last piece here is what we're working on for this year. We've got like our key projects. Our landfill working group, as I talked about, will be continuing our quarterly monitoring in proximity with the community and continuing to collaborate with the group on the solid waste management plan and working on that desktop assessment that we talked about earlier. We are also looking at installing some additional monitoring wells in conjunction with that program. The next phase of the solid waste management plan, phase 2, we're just completing our system review and put out the principles for consideration with the committee not too long ago here. So expect that to come out shortly. And then we're building towards the big engagement sessions that will be happening throughout the year to land on what potential options there are and what the draft master plan is going to look like. Our target is aiming to have the draft put together towards the end of this year, but it'll be really dependent on what we see as a result of the engagement piece. I spoke briefly about, updates of the monitoring program. That's a future initiative. That's something that we're working on as we sit here. We're integrating the new monitoring wells that we installed last year, continuing our sampling and upgrading some of our instrumentation systems to just enhance the overall environmental system that we have at the site. We talked about waste educator onboarding regarding Let's Talk Trash. And then the other one that we're looking at is the Bamfield waste hauling solution. And what that is working with contractors to purchase waste bin assets for Bamfield. It is a very unique waste collection situation, and creating that more attractive atmosphere for local haulers based on input that we had. That while we're able to provide the assets, they will be able to provide the hauling. So that's a piece that we're working on this year, and we're just actually working through the procurement piece for the bins. That's about it. So I will stop, and I shall stop sharing and let it go for questions.
Thank you very much for that. So my takeaway from this is we're doing okay. We're going in the right direction, but we can do much better. And I actually just wanted to point out, I did not drive through Tim Hortons today, and you were talking about trash. I brought my reusable cup. Director Cote, then Director Beckett.
Thank you. So in the report, it talks about from Pito, it talks about samples collected in the leachate, I guess. So ammonia, iron, magnesium, aluminum, cobalt, copper, all multiple times above the guidelines, and I guess from the guidelines. So they're above the standards. So can you talk a bit about that, please? Just concerned about the neighborhood.
No, I understand. And we can bring back our environmental group to talk to this more. But the key takeaway is that they're seeing those elevated concentrations, but they're also matching the background. So we measure before and after landfill. So that's something that we're looking at closely. But background concentrations of aluminum, magnesium, those types of things are present in background concentrations. In other words, pre-landfill as well. So we're not seeing any escape, if you want to call it that, of landfill leachate going off site. It's still being kept in through the leachate system itself.
Go ahead,
just another question. So are we monitoring the neighborhood for watching for any kind of health effects in the communities? So there's the Tishat Reserve that's right there. That's a neighbor, but there's also residents from Sprout Lake. So just wondering if we are monitoring any kind of health concerns with that could be brought back to these higher levels. Thank you.
We're focused specifically on the water criteria itself. We're working closely with Sichat and their consulting group. They're looking at additional studies such as what you described, but the focus is specifically ensuring that we don't go beyond what the background quality is. We don't have a specific health assessment being run.
Is that something that we should be looking at?
That's a fair question. That's oh, I see Jenny there.
Yeah, I can pop in on that. I really appreciate the concern around the water quality in landfills. It is valid and reasonable. It is interesting, as Paulo has talked about, doing a lot of our landfill working group because we've got the community that is so close. So it is of heightened concern for them, but anyone who's around a landfill. So we do have a very comprehensive monitoring program that we've worked with PITO. I think one of the benefits of with the tenure issue and having Sichat be consulted about getting a longer tenure has that we have now another independent environmental group that is working. They report directly to Sichat, that's PGL, is now reviewing and overviewing our own environmental consultants. So we have two separate environmental consultants that are reviewing some of the data that we're using. And it's great. It's been like very critical. Are these the right parameters that we're monitoring? Is this are we doing enough? That's why we're adding more monitoring wells and we're expanding the program. So I'm feeling very confident that, our program, it does show that we don't have a lot of concerns over our background, but we are picking at it and really poking that and making sure that this is a viable program. So I really appreciate that and just want to give that assurance that I think the program is good, but we also want to continue to look at it. And I think we will continue to move in that direction, especially now with this, third-party review of our program. I hope that provides a little more information.
Thank you for that, Jenny. Director Beckett.
Thank you. Paulo, last year, our transfer station staff member had approached me regarding getting the site leveled, the gravel leveled, and or paved or concreted, so that cleanup would be a lot easier, and moving the bins would be a lot easier. And he also mentioned that perhaps removing some of the trees out the front would make it easier for the folks coming in with their trucks to swing around, as opposed to having to doing a backup procedure. Has that been discussed, and can you comment on the status, please, of that as far as making some significant changes that would help keep that site a little bit easier to keep clean? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Beckett. Oh, can you hear me okay still? Sorry. Okay, thank you. Had the audio cut out. So yeah, we're aware of that. We've looked at some of the infrastructure costs, which are quite high. So what we've done is we've had the contractor go and re-level the site, do some gravel work, etc., to make that more approachable. We've installed safety curb stops also in front of the compound itself. Looking at grubbing more trees and all that, we really can't expand outside of the actual land parcel that we have. But we do have opportunity at some point to go and expand in the back if we need to. So that'll be part of a larger capital project that we're looking at. For now, within the budget, we're able to conduct the maintenance that we have in place to make that more accessible and keep a lot of the low brush growth that we have on the sides of the road clear.
Thank you for your work to date on that.
Thank you. Any other final questions or comments? Seeing none, I just want to thank you for an excellent report. And if the directors have not had a chance yet to read through the report, please take the time to read through it. It was a pretty good read, very detailed. So we appreciate your work you're doing on this.
Thank you so much, Chair. It was a team effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I get a motion that the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee receives this report? Moved by Director Beckett, second by Director Sparrow. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Question period. No one's in the gallery. Is there any questions online, Heather?
There's no questions in Zoom and no emails received. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Director Sparrow, second by Director Beckett. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone, for a great morning. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you. Have a great break. We'll see you in a bit. Bye.